How's it going, everybody? This is Rob Novakast back with another review for you guys. And with this one, this one is on a movie that I thought I reviewed for the channel, but have not yet, which was odd. And I looked back at my reviews, and sure enough, no, I haven't reviewed this one yet, even though I've kind of referenced it a couple of times in the podcast, and as well as one of my recent reviews, or at least not recent at this second, but I guess in the vein of the one particular review that I referenced it, which was the last Conjuring film, which was The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. But to an extent, I'm going to talk about it now, which was The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which was released around 2005, directed by Scott Derrickson, written by Paul Harris Brodman and Scott Derrickson, starring Laura Linney, Tom Wilkinson, Sheree Argaslow, hopefully I said that name correctly, and many, many others. Now, as a lot of people who don't know about this movie, or don't know about the case, which, spoilers, it is based on true events. The story itself follows a murder case where a pastor or priest is being convicted of negligent homicide for a girl who may or may not have been possessed. Now, as the movie itself, kind of how it's set up is actually really good, where it starts off with the family going finding Emily Rose dead, the coroner kind of wondering what the fuck happened, and just everything kind of spiraling out of control for the priest, as well as the lawyer, who is played by Laura Linney, and everybody trying to figure out, how or what happened. We have the perspective of the, especially with the lawyers, who at first they're like, okay, who's the best person for this case? We have, again, Laura Linney, who at first kind of plays the skeptic, who doesn't want to believe that this is an act of God or an act of the devil. And sure enough, her faith, as well as her, willpower, is tested throughout this entire ordeal. We have another particular lawyer who, to a certain degree, plays as a other lawyer, or I guess the persecutor, who is a full-fledged Catholic, and to an extent questions everything that happens, or at least questions the testimony of not only the priest, but as well as the testimony of a variety of other people that are involved in the case. And to a certain degree, at this point, they're trying to determine, again, whether or not that this girl, Emily Rose, was either truly possessed, or if anything, was more likely suffering some form of mental instability, or any sort of physical illness. And I gotta say, the way they presented it's done really well. We go back and forth, and this was a criticism that I had for The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, where it is based off a true case that happened, that occurred within the cases of Ed and Lorraine Warren. But one of my biggest gripes about that film was the fact that, again, we hear about the case near the beginning of the film, and we hear nothing about it till the very end. The only thing we hear about is the fact that, in that situation, there was them fighting the devil worshiper. Now, with this film, my biggest praise for it, above all, especially with it involving, a criminal case, is we go back and forth. We see, through flashbacks, through dialogue of how things were presented, how things happen. We see the flashbacks as well as see, the testimonies of, the individuals. We also see the counter theories of what was going on, and in some sense, a different perspective of what was actually going on with Emily, which is really cool. And it's something that I really did enjoy about this film. It's like seeing both point of views of what could have actually happened. And in the end, to a certain degree, I will say it sucks that it did not, unfortunately, go the way that it was originally intended, or at least in reality. Because it's the aftermath of the case is really tragic, and to an extent, I think if anything, they were trying to go for a more happier ending, but in the end, it wasn't as happy as everybody wants it to be, because in the end, especially with it again based on a true story, this girl Emily Rose did die, and somebody had to be held accountable for that, especially with as it was described, the girl was malnourished, clearly going through something, but nobody knew exactly of what. In fact, if anything, if you guys want to hear the aftermath, Joseph, Anna Mitchell, Father Renz, Pastor Alt were all found guilty in reality, were found guilty of negligent homicide. And when sentenced, it was a lot more severe when it came down to, with all four of them being sentenced to 6 months in jail and 3 years in probation. In fact, if anything, going further than that, a lot of people, there's a lot of debate when it comes down to this film of whether or not that this is a story of religion failing this poor girl, with it being a story of misdiagnosing mental illness. And a quote from the Medium, or medium.com, and I'll try leaving a link in the description in case I forget, but it's medium.com/crimebeat/ the tragic story behind the exorcism of Emily Rose. The last quote of this particular article reads, "It's a story of people in power and influence allowing someone to starve themselves to death because of fear of the devil." Which, and I'm playing, strangely enough, devil's advocate on this. I can see that. I mean, I will say that, strangely enough, I'm one of those people that is always curious of whether or not that something like this can actually happen, or if anything, if there's actual signs, even though, I mean, we see video and, photo of possible signs, but in reality, if there's actual signs of something like this actually happening to someone, and what is the usual reaction of whether, people who are religious immediately, ultimately claiming that it's, a work of the devil, or if anything, it may as well have been something that involves mental illness. And at this point, especially since, again, Emily Rose is now passed on, we'll never know. But the way it's presented, or at least the argument is presented in this film, is interesting, to say the least. Now, going into imagery, some of the imagery that we see, especially with, where we see some of, within the flashbacks, we see hallucinations that we see from Emily's point of view. I'm going to say some of the imagery is really grim, or if anything, it's actually really imaginative, really good. Going further than that, actually, speaking of, some of the hallucinations, I want to talk about the acting. The actress that plays Emily Rose, which is Jennifer Carpenter, oh my gosh. The things she does in this film, it is, especially when it comes down to, like, the moments where where it seems like she's becoming possessed. It is, to an extent, I want to say it makes you cringe. It does not make you feel, like, very good in the situation of her being possessed. Like, it is, I guess if anything, it's unsettling. It's uncomfortable. Just to name a few things that is how I feel when you see her possession. The way she contorts her bodies in certain moments, which I kind of question, because I guess that was her that did that, but I kind of question whether or not that was her. Near the end where she is, like, becomes fully possessed, or at least in the flashbacks of the priest, the way she acts in the barn scene, it is so freaking unsettling, and it is actually really good and adds to, I guess, if anything, the terror and the belief of this girl being, or possibly being, possessed. Now, going further than that, I'm not gonna lie. This is probably one of those films is really good, and again, brings up the question of whether or not this was actually a possession, or if anything, was more than likely a case of a girl suffering from things that may or could have been explained. But again, we will never know. So, with that, this is a phenomenal movie. I enjoy it, and if anything, especially when it comes to future films that are like this, or if anything similar to this sort of genre, I'll probably make reference of it, because it is one of those films that actually does a really good job kind of putting into question of whether or not that what is happening is actually happening, or if anything, it's all in the individual's head. So, with that, I think I'm going to give this movie a 10 out of 10. I enjoy it. I'm one of those people that, and I know I give a lot of high marks a lot of times, but in the end, it's just my opinion on how I feel about this film. I think they did really well with this, like, way back when this was released, which was, again, in 2005. So, with that, 10 out of 10, I enjoyed it. What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. If you guys can, though, please leave a like, comment, share, subscribe, all the good stuff. If you guys want to follow us on social media, links are in the description down below, as well as check out our daily content and the weekly podcast. With that being said, this is Rob Novakast signing off. Have a good one. Take care. Peace.